If you've been prepping for a while, like I have, you start to learn some things that are inevitabilities in the sense of recognizing your limitations. And that's something that I think we should all come to terms with because it's important to be able to move forward strategically based on what you're willing to invest in and what you're willing to learn over time. Because this whole thing is a marathon and you don't necessarily need to make it to the finish line today because there basically is no finish line. And that's where things get a little bit complicated and why you need to figure out your specialization. What are you specialized in and why is specialization important? Now, let me explain it to you because it's something that I run into quite a bit, and I assume, based on that experience, that a lot of you probably have the same issue. When you're trying to prepare for whatever it is, the end of the world, SHTF, a natural disaster, societal collapse, whatever it may be, there's a lot of different bases that you try to cover. We want to make sure we have food stored away. We want access to clean, drinkable water. We want to be able to take care of our own health necessities. And we also want to be able to power our own homes. We need to be able to protect ourselves. We need to be able to do a lot of different things. And in doing so, we have to dilute our focus in order to expand our horizons. The problem with that is that there's categories of preparedness that people like me will never be extremely proficient in. And what do I mean by that? Well, for example, I'm never going to be medically at the same level as someone who is professionally trained to be a doctor or a nurse or anyone else in the medical field. I'm also never going to be as good at food production as a farmer. I'm never going to be as good at dealing with bad guys as a Navy SEAL. Like, these are all things that you have to just come to terms with and understand that you're just not that guy. And that's okay. And we can all do our best to at least have some basic knowledge of each individual subject. But specialization matters because what you're good at is what you really should be focused on when it comes to being better prepared so that you can provide as much value as possible to any community that you might find yourself a part of. Now, I'm going to give you something actionable here. I'm going to give you a little bit of homework that hopefully you're willing to do to try to give you a little bit more of a roadmap towards rounding out some of your preparedness pitfalls so that way you can be better off in the future if we ever have to rely on some of these skills or the equipment or the supplies that we've stored away. So, first I want to go ahead and introduce the concept of my specialization to give you an idea of what you might want to consider, okay? Look at your career, look at your personal life, and figure out what it is that you have the most time and energy spent on, and then how it would apply to preparedness. Now, unfortunately, there are careers out there that might not really have much to offer in that regard, but you can, of course, learn something from just about anything, so don't write it off just because you can't think of an immediate reason for why it's applicable. But for my personal situation, I'll just explain it to give you something to work with for yours. Career-wise, I spent a lot of time running businesses, starting new businesses, and in management. So, what does that make me good at? Well, and a lot of that career was in the hospitality industry. So, a lot of my job was related to managing inventory systems, ensuring that resources were spent properly and used properly within an organized fashion regarding timelines. I also had to manage people. I had to make sure that human resources was where it needed to be and that we had the morale in the right place when it came to employees. So that experience at face value, you might say, well, you worked in the food industry, so you should probably be good at food stuff. But that's just not exactly how it works. What I have to offer and what my specialization might be is in management in the sense of organizing and leading groups of people, and in inventory management or logistics in the sense of ensuring supplies are where they need to be when they need or when they're needed and aren't used beyond what is required. So that is where I can lend some professional expertise, not to mention just the challenges of running businesses in general is very similar to any other operation that has to have certain goals or deadlines being met in order to survive, right? Now, personally, when it comes to personal interests and hobbies, one of my, I guess you would say, highest levels of focus has been on firearms for a very long time, because I very much enjoy firearms and everything they bring to the table when it comes to being able to do deep dives in a very spectrum way, while also learning a little bit about how to protect yourself and what equipment is viable for that purpose and everything else related to it. So now I can take some of that personal experience and apply it towards saying, well, I generally have more knowledge than the rest of the people within my immediate group or immediate area that I interact with on a networking basis regarding preparedness when it comes to the way firearms work or the way different munition types and equipment types work, or whether or not they're viable for the purposes that are being intended. And at the same time, I also have the ability to supply a lot of things regarding spare parts. I have the skills and the tools to repair things and to maintain things. I also have the ability to reload ammunition and lots of other things related to firearms in general. So when we combine the personal and the professional experience, that is where I have the most value in a group and where I personally have the most expertise, even as an individual. So I've identified where my value is, right? I'm a manager of both people and things with a specialized interest in firearms slash the armory, let's just say. Great. Now there's a lot more that's required to maintain a survivable community throughout an emergency long-term event. Here's where the homework comes into play. What are you missing when it comes to outside of your personal expertise? So for me, that's going to start building a list. And this is the list that I want you to build for yourself in order to be better off during a long-term emergency scenario. This list for me is going to include things like farming, production, gardening, okay? Well, I have a neighbor who does that very well, who I'm helping. And guess what? As an example of how this would work in a ideal situation, I'm helping him on his farm, which is helping me learn about how farming works. He has the production capacity to help me out when it comes to things like a freezer full of beef that I have right now. And in return, not only am I providing manual labor, but he's also hoping I will teach his children how to use firearms properly and how to be more knowledgeable about them in general. So that's just a very microcosm example of how this would work on a larger scale. But I thought that was worth sharing because farming and production and gardening is something that I'm not very good at or know a lot about or even have the equipment for. So I need that in my group, in my community, or in my network. The same can be applied to medical or dental or anything along those lines. Not my expertise. I'd rather have somebody with that expertise than trying to figure out how to be the best at that I can possibly be, because it will always fall short. And the same could be applied to tactics. A guy who has training from the military or the police or anything along those lines is going to be more trustworthy than me when it comes to dealing with an actual threat that requires a kinetic response. So on and so forth. Another example, a guy within my network who's local to my area is very well versed in communications and the use of radios and has all of that information locked down completely. He relies on me for firearms related information. So this is what I would like you to do. Figure out what you specialize in. Figure out how it could be applied to a long-term emergency situation, how it helps you in your preparedness, and figure out how it provides value to others who may not have that specialization. And then I want you to write a list down or just compile a list, whether or not it's digitally or just in your mind, whatever's easier for you. This doesn't have to be hard. And figure out what you need to add to your specialization in order to have a cohesive team or network or community that can provide everyone with what they need at the highest form. And then you exactly know who you need to recruit to said team or community or network in order to have a viable long-term sustainability situation put together. And with that, if you were able to start crossing names off that list of people who have those specializations, who are willing to participate or at least willing to network in case of an emergency, you just created a survivable community. And that's something that is more powerful and can accomplish a lot more than you trying to learn all of it and then basically falling short in every category. And that's the exact experience I have had, which I'm sure many of you have experienced as well. To put the time, energy, and effort into learning everything is basically impossible. It's one of the reasons why I still struggle to get involved with the communications side of technology. It's one of the reasons why I still struggle to get involved with the medical side of trying to apply first aid. A rudimentary level, could I stop a bleed? Sure. Can I treat someone for the next 3 months while they're recovering? I don't know, right? And those are all things that you just have to come to terms with. But what if the answer to that question was, hey, can I stop a bleed? Yeah. And then Frank down the street, yeah, he's a surgeon. So I know he has the medical background to help us make sure that person survives thereafter. Isn't that a great way or a great feeling about looking into the future of how you'll deal with some of these things rather than just putting it all on yourself and realizing that you'll never be very good at it, right? And that's just something I've had to realize, and it's something that's just the truth. And that's okay. We all have our jobs to do. But being very good at your job is something that provides value to others who have never done your job before. And that's something that I think is worth considering. So I wanted to share this with you and give you something to actually work on. If you'd like to go back to the usual programming of telling you about how the world is going to end tomorrow, hit the subscribe button down below because I'll just do that one day and we'll have a great time with it. But in general, we're in interesting times. And because of that, my goal is to give you things that you can actually do that might actually help you out. Or, at the very least, give you information that has value to it. So, anything else you need from me, go to magicprepper.com. There will be some new announcements coming here in the near future about some other things that I'm trying to put out for the community in the sense of some business direction. And at the same time, it's a great place to network because there's a free Discord server there full of people who have different backgrounds and specializations. So, without anything else to say for it, or about it, or with it, whatever I'm using today, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.